This episode is brought to you by Padaris, empowering transport planners everywhere. See padaris.com/podcast for details. Today's guest established his business after almost 2 decades of working within transport planning and highways consultancies, representing both public and private sector clients throughout UK and Ireland. TPK, Mayer Brown, SLR, and of course Curtins Consulting have all provided P45s and glowing references, no doubt, since the year 2000 until January 2017, when the time was right, of course, to do things your own way and go it alone. Keen to avoid creating an organisation that's obsessed by its own branding, committing rather to growing a team and its culture to exploit the unique experiences of each individual, Calibro Consultants, based in Bristol, is fast approaching 7 years, providing transport planning, highways and infrastructure services. Managing Director and Head of Transport Planning, Stuart Choak, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Much appreciated. If you happen to have a copy of those referrals that you mentioned, then do pass them on. I'd love to frame
those
them.
references, yeah. Well, I'm sure there must be some going around. Stuart, I just want to jump straight into that statement I've just said there. What does that last paragraph actually mean? I think I must have found that during some research for this podcast. To exploit the unique experiences of each individual. What does that mean?
I think for me, when I founded the business, it was really in a reaction to a feeling that business was not really an equitable process. It's a generalization, but I think actually the businesses are made up of individuals. Each have their different learnings, their different experiences. They bring different things to the table. And actually it goes back to the old adage that we're better and bigger than the sum of our parts. So it was really just an awareness to understand what those differences are and to exploit them for the betterment of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Is that the name where Calibro is derived? I'm not sure whether that's a Latin, maybe an Italian word, the caliber or the gauge of each individual. And who came up with that name?
So the easy part of it is that I came up with the name after the initial thought process and awareness that with a stupid surname like Choak, I couldn't call it Choak Associates. That was just never going to float. But also, it's not a business that I wanted to be about me. It was about the process and kind of the arrogance of knowing that we had a brand that was doing good things, essentially. So equally, I wanted it to be scalable. So again, not geographically constrained. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The idea of caliber and quality was the starting point. I'm not a particularly creative person. I come from that engineering background, so I did the usual thing of putting in those sort of that brain dump of words that I think meant something or would mean something in how we operated. Googled it, and Calibro came as a result of caliber. But again, it was just something that wasn't quite so obvious, that it was a bit different. And again, that message that we are different, we want to be different, we'll always be different. Through innovation. So the name just kind of stuck.
And it clicked, yeah, good on you. Now listen, during my research for the show, Stuart, I found out that you didn't have perhaps, let's call it the usual route into transport planning, geography degree maybe. From A-levels, I think you did product design, was that right? And then perhaps a technical role or technical role within CAD. Was that a TPK? Bring us up to date.
Yeah, so I fell into the industry, to be honest. My original plan was to finish A-levels, take a year out, and then go and do a product design course at university. In that year out, I wanted to make sure it was still fruitful and beneficial to the product design course. So I was looking for opportunities that did exploit the CAD or would teach me CAD skills. Was just fortunate to be in Newbury, where TPK were headquartered. Managed to get a job as a junior technician. So, right at the, involved in the grunt work essentially, but 100% focused on CAD. And then that evolved into some of the numerical analyses as well. And just grew from there. So very technical upbringing through the industry, and probably the best way into the industry from my point of view.
It's late into 2016. I think I know who your boss would have been at that time. You've decided to tend your notice and realise the dream of Calibro. We don't need to name any names here, but did he give you any words of advice, encouragement, or try and change your mind with a better or even a counter offer?
Easy answer is no, but I will start off by caveating that that individual, who we won't name, was brilliant. Very supportive throughout my time at Curtins. Complete respect for him. When I tendered my resignation, it was open and transparent to the point that I wanted to try and do something by myself. They were very supportive of that, but obviously I had hopes that it was going to be bigger than just me in the back bedroom, which I think was probably the expectation from the other party. So, business is business, but, there was I made it very clear when tendering the resignation, as well as I have done throughout my whole career. I didn't go to him wanting a counter offer. This was my decision. I'd already done my thinking on it. And this was something I needed to try for me and my family. If it didn't work out, I knew I wouldn't be a business owner. But I wanted to try it because I wanted to push myself.
You've just mentioned the word family there, Stuart. Behind every great man, of course, there is a great woman. Who supported you on this venture? Is it your wife behind you, I must guess?
Yeah, Jenna, been together now for, 16, 17 years, 4 kids. Couldn't ask for more support from Jen. Fortunate that her dad set up his business at 22. So she's seen the hard work that goes into it. She's seen the kind of the personal reward and obviously the financial security that comes with it as well. So, I couldn't do it without her.
Sure. All right, listen, thanks for the introduction, Stuart. Let's start off with some more deeper questions if we can. Why don't we start with your current view of development planning? Resilience and adaptability are surely increasingly important due to the current state of the planning system. Can you discuss how you've incorporated these elements, or indeed your own choice of words, into your development planning schemes, ensuring that planning remains functional and efficient for clients under what we probably can all agree are difficult or challenging circumstances?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you've used a couple of phrases and words there that are interesting. So I think you talked about remain productive. The reality is that we're not in an environment where the development sector is productive. The politics have completely taken over the market. I think that the Tory party are positioning themselves for the election. They are appearing to go to the extreme right. And certainly there is a very obvious focus on developers as being the bad guys, essentially. Now that does cause problems. It slowed down local plans around the country. And certainly decision-making is stalled. So that, from a commercial point of view, it's not exactly boom time at the moment, but there are opportunities. And that those opportunities are about adaptation. And from that adaptation, we get the resilience that you mentioned as well. And for me, it's not about just doing what we've always done. Obviously, we've got a process that we need to follow. We've got evidence that we need to provide and justifications. But actually, we're in an era now of climate emergency and move towards net zero. The decisions on the right homes in the right places is going to be made under that framework. But we need to then win the hearts and minds of both the local residents, but also the politicians who represent them as well. So it's about creating a narrative around the technical evidence that we provide. And so having the relatively dry engineering reports that perhaps went a few decades ago, they're just not good enough anymore. We need to tell that story, tell them why this is a unique opportunity to help them deliver on their objectives for their community in the interest of, the global climate, essentially. And then, spin off from that those other benefits about placemaking and spillover community effects, etc. So that's the key thing for me, that there's clear problems, but the way to securing that commercial success for our client is actually aligning ourselves to the community and showing them how we solve their problems.
Would you say that's been part of your success? I know you've only been in business 7 years, but that's a lot longer than perhaps what most would have done. Do you feel that's kind of one of the reasons why you're ahead?
Yeah, I'd like to say so. I certainly think it's a differentiator from some of our competitors and peers. And I think it goes back to our values of openness and transparency, always being on their side. Theirs can be defined as the client, but also the community. Yeah, the reality is if you're good at your job, you don't need to hide the evidence, share it to be scrutinized, carry people along the journey and, ultimately come to the same conclusion. But we don't operate in a field of absolute science. It's a toolbox of different methodologies and assumptions that get us to the conclusion.
Yeah.
The storytelling comes in not from a fudge, but from a very clear narrative as to why we've done certain things in that analytical approach. But what that means is a tangible output in that move towards sustainable development, and evidencing what that really means. It's not just a tagline phrase that it probably has been, that we can actually evidence what that benefit means for the local community.
Stuart, engaging with various stakeholders is crucial in any transport or design project, from communities to the local authorities. Can you share with us a situation where you have successfully managed diverse interests and conflicting viewpoints to deliver a project that satisfied all parties involved?
Yes and no. I don't think there's probably any project where all parties will be satisfied. There's always a reluctance for local communities to see more housing. I think that's just a matter of fact. However, there's certainly one project that springs to mind where we've taken a different approach, and actually our approach contrasts on this project with a competitor that had been promoting the site previously.
Are we allowed to name any names, or should we keep that under wraps?
I think we'll keep that respectfully under wraps, I think. But that was very much an engineering-led traditional route. The site's 1,000 units, neighbourhood centre, primary school, 10 hectares of employment. Yeah, it's an urban expansion to a new town at Cranbrook and Exeter. It's an important part of the strategy for that region. Unsuccessfully promoted and stalled previously because of the approach that had been taken in a large part, and not the only part. So, I'm not going to overplay it, but it was taking an existing 3-arm roundabout as a primary access, literally doubling the size of it to create another arm into the site on a congested road, the only way between Cranbrook and Exeter. Cranbrook suffering with a sense of arrival, not having a sense of arrival or a character as such. It's a new build town. But when we were invited to work on the project, the first thing that we did was get under the skin of the policy. The policy was great. It really helped us to position ourselves in how we would tackle this project. And the policy talked about the fact that this main road between Cranbrook and Exeter was serving as essentially an informal bypass to the town at the moment. Our site would jump over that road. And the fear was that people would just continue just to drive through, create severance effects. They wouldn't really realise they're stopping, that they've arrived at Cranbrook, and it certainly wouldn't be a natural thing to stop there and spend money, to socialise, etc. All those kind of important community activities that you find in successful places. So that idea of having a 60-metre wide roundabout just didn't really gelled with that policy for us. When we started to look at it, we thought a better way of approaching it was actually to make the roundabout smaller. Take it down to a mini roundabout and create a second mini roundabout offline. Essentially, what we were looking to do was to try and recreate some of that friction that you get in traditional high streets. Every organic high street has some conflict. It creates slow-moving traffic. It's just a feature of the town. But that was better for us to have slow-moving traffic rather than queuing traffic. Having that activity, creating slow-moving traffic allows for pedestrians and cyclists to cross over the road, etc. But also looking at the alignment of the road allowed us to create terminal views when you approach the junction. So you're automatically faced with, we're at Cranbrook, from whichever destination you're coming from or origin you're coming from. We've arrived at Cranbrook. What's our decision? Do we drive through? Do we stop? Do we spend money? Do we go to the pub, etc.? And it was clear from the very first pre-app meeting that we had with the local authority, and both Highway Authority and Planning Authority, that this was a welcome approach. It was different to what was being taken on site previously, but also on the other 3 expansion areas. This was kind of the moment. It was exactly the kind of response that they wanted. It was a softer, people-led approach rather than a vehicle-led approach. The benefit of that is that previous to our involvement, the scheme had been promoted for several years. As I say, unsuccessfully. We were able to come in as part of a great team. And again, it was a product of everybody's input. But ultimately, as part of that team, we were able to secure resolution to grant within 7 months of it being submitted. Now, for that scale of project, that would normally go on for at least a year, 2 years, with all the politics and the complications over traffic movements. But because we engaged early, because we carried the stakeholders with us, because everything about that process was genuine and we listened and we adapted, when it came to submitting, there wasn't that normal standoff between, client, consultant, local authority. It was a partnership of that approach. We were helping, and we definitely positioned the scheme in this way. We were helping the authority to deliver their vision for the homes that they needed to deliver.
Yeah.
So
did that mean that they would engage with you? Sorry, I was just going to say that. Does that mean that they wanted to engage with you more? They wanted to kind of not be standoff with you. They were happy to engage and get a resolution to the project because you were bringing it to life quicker.
Oh, without a doubt, there was always the transparency and honesty. There were conversations where we said, we couldn't react in a certain way for commercial reasons, for example. There are other ways where we carried the agenda. So we said we don't, for example, the spine road through the development didn't connect all the way through to the secondary access. We put a bus gate between to stop rat running through the development. We carried the agenda to really think about the place. And again, that rat running is really a great example for that, because it wasn't about just stopping rat running for rat running's sake. It was about protecting the environment that we were creating. It was making sure we weren't transferring the potential severance that was happening on London Road into the development and doubling the impact. It was about creating that walkable, cyclable neighbourhood. So having those conversations, some of them tough, some of them really pragmatic, was really important.
Yeah. Stuart, are you kind of known? Is Calibro kind of known for these kind of really difficult, projects? I'm not saying that you're not the only person in the world that can do these. What sounds like a challenging project, but is that kind of what you're known for? Do you kind of stick your hand up or volunteer when things really get tough? Perhaps with other consultancies might need some help.
Yes and no. I think we certainly have our fair share of complex projects, and certainly we seem to do very well against our competitors when we're bidding on those complex projects because of our approach. And I think certainly we've proven ourselves in those circumstances before. But I think also from a professional kind of arrogance point of view, and I'm not afraid of using the word arrogance. I think that's what motivates me. It's that sort of motivation to achieve the best. So it's definitely the healthier side of it. But every project we undertake, becomes complex because it's not just a process. For us, the output we test, is it the best solution? If there's a problem, rather than automatically going to the off-the-shelf solution of building a bigger junction, we'll go back to the analytical process and see, have we actually got this right? Can we create some refinements within that process, ultimately to save the client money? So I would say probably almost all of our projects are saving multiples of our fee because of our involvement, and we're not just turning a handle saying it's all okay. And again, every project we undertake, we always have the view that it could end up in appeal. So we have that level of rigor in our reviews as well.
Let's talk about that process there quickly. Is there a formula or a specific approach that you do, every time you approach a new project? How can you ensure you kind of deliver this consistently every time? Is there a methodology? How do you do it?
I think it's just about having that energy, that motivation to really probe everything that's out there. So it's not just responding to the brief from the client. The client normally provides a great brief. They've already done their own due diligence, etc. But there's so many different nuggets of information that we can get from other disciplines, from policy, and again, different layers of policy. We need to be able to, as professionals, drive the agenda and not just react to what the client thinks they want, or think they want. Apologies. Ultimately, our purpose is to help them gain planning permission. But if we can do that by shortening the consultation process, because we've been able to anticipate complexities along the way, they might not be complexities at the start of the project, but we know through the consultation process, the local authority might have a particular agenda relating to cycles, for example, or walkability because they've lost out on some funding, for example. We need to go back and we need to understand that, see how we can align that development proposal to the council's objectives. And if there's a way of doing that commercially, then we need to be flagging that and planning for it. If it's not commercial, then we're still consultants at the end of the day. But I think that's absolutely key. It's just that natural inquisitiveness at the start to understand everything, and you'll find constraints and opportunities.
This episode of Practical Perspectives is brought to you by Padaris. Planning, engineering, and stakeholder engagement seamlessly integrated into the cloud. To discover how Padaris is helping the likes of Arup, WSP, and Sistra plan smarter, faster, and more collaboratively, head over to padaris.com/podcast today. Stuart, aspiring transport planners often seek practical advice to excel in their careers. I think that's why we called the show Practical Perspectives. What skills, in your opinion, either technical and soft, do you consider most essential for success in this field today? And are there any gaps that you're seeing that need filling or skill sets that maybe need sharpening in transport planners today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the one bit of advice I would give to anybody entering the industry now, or to be honest, at any part of their career, it's never too late. It's not something that we can train people in, but it is to be naturally inquisitive. It's to want to understand more. It's not just about putting your data into a model, getting the answer out. You need to understand what that black box is doing. Not only is that going to allow you to be able to respond to problems that the output might identify, but it will identify opportunities for you to mitigate in a cheaper way. So again, for example, signalised junctions with a right turn signal head, allowing for, say, two vehicles to stack ahead of the stop line. When you go to site, the road markings might be worn out. People might not be moving up, waiting for those gaps in the traffic to occur. That's missing out on capacity in the modelling. Now, if you understand that and you're looking for that kind of level of detail, when you go back to base, you can model that existing situation as if there's no stacking availability ahead of the stop line. You can then offer mitigation to refresh the road markings for a few £1,000s, essentially, reintroduce that capacity. It's already there, it's just hidden, but that could be enough to mitigate and offset your impacts to the development. The other side of it is just not to settle. That inquisitiveness to understand it is kind of the first part of it, but don't settle. There will be people like me, great people, better than me, that will mentor you, tell you how to do things, approach things. And it's probably perfectly right to do that now, but policy will change, culture will change. you need to get to grips with how people move and travel, what their motivations are, and really push that into the design of the place. So as transport planners, we need to realise what we're designing are functional aspects of the place. But those functional aspects, the roads, the footways, the cycleways, they can be tweaked to support the place. Pushing and pulling and twisting and bending the roads, changing the material surface, changing the level of the roads, etc., can all make very subtle but important differences. So don't ever just stand still. Don't get to a point in your career where you can say, I can do it. Get to the point where you can say, I can do it better. And that should always be that sort of dynamic force.
I love that. Stuart, tell the listeners about a historical project that really drove the limits of your professional capacity, a problem perhaps that tested you and all your team to the limits, and of course, tell us the outcome.
So I have a 10-year problem that we finally come to a solution on, and it goes back before Calibro. The first draft release of the MPPF that really for the first time put sustainability at the front and centre of the decision-making process. But as we still got now, completely ill-defined. Sustainability is not a moment in time. It's not a preset condition. It's definitely left for the decision-maker, which allows for politics to have too much control over the decision-making process. Now, I wasn't happy as a professional, even going back 10 years, to simply say a site is sustainable because we're 400 metres from a bus stop. There's this bus frequency that will get you to the town centre. We're 1 kilometre from the railway station, etc., etc. We are better than that as an industry, and we have to be better than that. And I think now more than ever, because of the climate emergency and the legal obligations towards net zero. So over the last 10 years, I've been working with colleagues to try and create a model that allows us to generate metrics to identify when something is sustainable. It's a comparative approach because, again, sustainability in one location versus another may be two different things. Think about the rural versus urban context. This model allows us to work out how many trips are being generated, where those movements need to get to, and then using a very intelligent modelling process behind the scenes, it will then decide how those people will travel. It will essentially mode it, bus, walk, cycle, etc. And then building in a further layer on how many diesel cars we've got, petrol, electric. It will create the residual CO2 emissions from transport, but it allows us to do that in a spatial context. So it's the big picture thinking, why here? And importantly, why not there from a client's perspective? So if we put 1,000 units in this location, what's the residual CO2 from traffic in that location versus an alternative? But then from that baseline, and that's about understanding the ingrained opportunity. And again, this move towards sustainability and net zero, for us as professionals, although it's not explicit in the policy, it has to mean that we have to identify the very best sites first, because we've got a time limit to achieve it as well. Simply to fund a bus service to make something sustainable, for example, is retrofitting those sustainability principles. If we find something that's got those ingrained opportunities from the get-go, you can still make investment and take it that bit further. And that bit further might then also create overspill effects to the surrounding communities and encourage them to change their travel behaviour. So that's been a massive headache for us. As I say, 10 years worth of kind of evolution, problems, or failures, essentially.
Yeah.
And
has it got a name?
Changing tack, developing it further. Sorry, say again.
Has it got a name? Have you called it something? Where can we find it? Where can we see it?
It will have a name. So this is something in-house at the moment. Right. There will be some further marketing stuff going on in the new year about it. But there is the latest version of it, and there's different layers that we've developed for different scenarios. But the most advanced version of it has been rolled out on a large sort of 1,000 unit scheme over in Winchester at the moment. Gone down really well. the key thing is understanding that we don't just plow on and do things new for the sake of doing it new. So again, the approach that we've taken builds on trust that has been established elsewhere as well. So stakeholder engagement, comfort, signing off, etc.
Stuart, how about you give us access to a critical mistake or a severe error of judgment in your own career? What was the outcome and what did you learn, if you're brave enough to share something with us?
I'll be more than brave. I will say I mess up every day. Our colleagues mess up every day. I'm sure everybody in the industry messes up every day. The key thing is to make sure that as a business, we have a kind of a sandbox environment so that people are encouraged to make decisions knowing that if it's a mistake, it can still be caught early and not impact on project delivery of the client. Because that's how we learn. But importantly, those decisions can open up new opportunities and innovations. And even if they don't get it right now, that whole kind of Dyson concept of, we've got to make 100 or experience 100 failures before we find a success. That's very much the kind of culture that we're trying to build within Calibro. So yes, lots of mistakes, but probably the one that I'll be open about now, which is much more timely as well, is really just an awareness that in setting up the business, I've created and hopefully mentored the guys that we've got with us, very much with a long-term plan for them essentially to take over the business and to, deliver our future successes. Have I been quick enough in appreciating that they're at the level where I can really step back and give them the freedom to show just how good they are? The answer is no. That should have happened months ago, a year ago, etc. But I'm just at that point now of really encouraging it. They're great guys, and it's just been I've been so focused on the business, so focused on the technical delivery as a company, that actually I should have been able to stand back and realise that those guys are more than capable to take over and drive the business forward.
Yeah. Do you think the business could have been impacted financially as a baseline very differently had you done that, say, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ago?
Oh, yeah, no, without a doubt. I think, but first and foremost, so money is important in any business, but it's not our primary motivation. It goes back to the point of kind of this healthy amount of arrogance. We want to leave the office on a Friday feeling like we've made a difference, we've done good work. But it comes down to the basic premise. The guys that we've got are at least as good as me, if not better. So if I've constrained the business to just be about me driving it forward, it could have been 4 or 5 times better and bigger if I'd released the guys in the strategic leadership team a bit earlier. So yeah, there will inevitably be an impact to it. The key thing is we sort of live and learn. It's the first time I've set up a business, first time I've experienced this kind of transition that's needed in the business. So if I had to set up the business again, knowing what I know now, I would do it differently. But we're still following that same journey.
Stuart, thanks for that, and I really appreciate your honesty. Why don't we move on and perhaps tell me something that not everyone in your position might know or be aware of, but perhaps should be. What is something that's often overlooked in transport planning?
I think for me, I mean, there's going to be loads of different answers. You ask anybody, they'll come up with a different answer. But I think for me, the most significant one is recognizing that there's been a failure in the industry over at least the last 20 years, if not longer. People who've been brought in, particularly in the early noughties, as graduates, they've been given a job to do. It might be just report writing. Other people have been doing the numerical analysis, the capacity modeling, and then feeding it across the report writers. People have generally, and it's a generalization, but people, in my experience, have been quite siloed they're not rounded transport planners as perhaps they would have been back in the kind of 80s, early 90s, when a lot of people came out of councils where there was the training there to support their career. Now, what that's done is not having rounded experiences makes it really difficult to push the agenda, to look at the big picture, to adapt, and to be resilient. So I think for me, it's about, again, never standing still. It's about trying to put yourself in those positions to learn everything that you can. Even if you don't think it's your role, learn everything that you can, because you can then control more in the future. And I think that's been missing from the industry. It's very process driven, or has been process driven.
Stuart, what's next for Stuart Choak and Calibro Transport?
Well, we're not quite at the point where I can run the business from my yacht in Monaco, but we are definitely looking to expand our geographical coverage. Take what we think is our perfect approach, if you like, from an arrogant perspective, to different parts of the country. That will happen hopefully in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, but will be an ongoing program. The key thing for us is that our expansion program isn't about creating new offices and new business. They will be developed in a culturally aligned way, so much more organic. From a personal perspective, I'm looking forward to leading on that. Again, Bristol is set up with some great people. I'll still be involved, but those guys are absolutely brilliant. So it allows me then to focus on those next stages of the business.
Just thinking ahead, say 10 years, because you were just talking about what I would say more the immediate future. Where is Calibro going? Multi-offices, multi-sites across the UK, maybe abroad? What's the dream?
Probably not abroad. I think certainly the UK is enough for us to handle. The business was not set up to take over the world. We will grow where people want us and where people understand the differences that we bring. So there's no clear plan that we'll have eight offices in these locations. It will be more organic. And again, we're in a time when policy is changing, so that making those types of plans will be difficult. But absolutely, we think we are doing the right thing for the right reasons, and we want to try and take that to more clients.
Stuart, as always, thank you so much for your time and input today. I really appreciate you coming on. I wish you the best success with your future, not only with your family, but with the business, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Practical Perspectives has been proudly supported by Padaris, the trusted toolkit empowering transport planners everywhere to plan faster, smarter, and more collaboratively. Experience the future of transport planning today at padaris.com/podcast.